Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Mo Fathelbab is a thinker, planner, and a doer with extensive experience in entrepreneurship, coaching, and leadership development. Mo is the founder and president of Forum Resources Network, the co-founder of Harvard Business School Alumni Forums, and the founder of the International Facilitators Organization. He's a sought-after speaker and facilitator known for fostering authentic connections and growth within organizations. Mo is also an accomplished author. His first book, Forum, The Secret Advantage of Successful Leaders, provides insights into creating powerful peer support groups. His second book, The Friendship Advantage, 7 Keys to Building Relationships That Transform Culture and Drive Productivity, explores the importance of relationships in achieving success. Before launching Forum Resources Network, Mo served as the executive director of the Entrepreneurs Organization from 1991 to 1997. During this time, he launched hundreds of EO peer groups and grew the organization from 100 to 2,000 global members, including helping to launch most of the Australian EO chapters with Dean Lindell. Mo's extensive experience working with high-profile clients and organizations makes him a valuable resource for anyone looking to improve leadership and team performance. Mo also has a podcast called The Heart of Business, where he explores the human side of leadership. You can find Mo at mofathelbab.com. Mo, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Brad. Great to be with you.
Mo, can you tell us about your journey from when you first joined the Entrepreneurs Organization to founding the International Facilitators Organization?
Wow, well, that's a long journey spanning a few decades, but let me see if I could do it briefly, and then we could delve into whichever areas you would like.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, graduating from college, I met the founder of EO, which was called YEO back then, Young Entrepreneurs Organization, and he was the best teacher I ever had. He was my entrepreneurship professor my senior year, and because he was my favorite teacher, I ended up being his favorite student. And he hired me out of college to be associate director.
And of course, that's Vern Harnish.
Yeah, of course, Vern Harnish. Yes,
Yep.
The legendary Vern Harnish.
Yep.
And of course, within 9 months, he decided to step down as executive director. He's always the founder, of course. And I became executive director. And Brad, I was literally less than a year out of college. So talk about, performance anxiety or what do you call it? Imposter syndrome, right? So it was kind of a scary time to have a position that sounded and perhaps was so big at such a young age.
Wow. But you obviously managed to deal with that and embrace it and then went on. So tell us about, just give us the first snippet. So you're at the Entrepreneurs Organization, and then just give us the kind of the synopsis overview, and then we'll kind of dig it back in.
Yeah, it's funny, when I started, we literally had, amazing founding board members, but many of them hadn't paid their dues. And I would say, we had maybe 100 dues paying members. And it was exciting, and it was challenging, and it was everything. At that same time, we had an affiliation with the Young Presidents Organization. Vern very strategically found the founder of YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, Ray Hickok, and asked him to be on our advisory board and be an honorary founder. And then his daughter became the first official president of EO. And as chairman of the board, so to speak. So I was the professional hired executive director, and she had the title of president, but really she was chairman of the board. And through that, we got closer and closer to YPO, and YPO gave us support in terms of mentorship at the various cities around the world to get our chapters started. But we also learned Forum from YPO back in 1991, and I fell in love with it. You know, I went into this 2-day program up in Toronto, and it was taught by Don and Bonnie Folk, and we had about 20 EO members from Canada, Mexico, and the US who came in to get trained on how to run these peer groups. And we were all blown away. It was a very profound and meaningful and emotional experience. But what I quickly realized is we can't expect these people to come to a 2-day training and effectively start peer groups in each of their chapters. So by the time, a few months came by, I'd gone to another program of YPOs, and I went to our board and I said, hey, if we're going to get this on the map, I think we need to train all our members so that we don't count on one messenger expecting, one training to be effective for that person to go start these groups. So I combined,
I'll just ask you quickly, we've got a lot of audience members who are EO or YPO. For those who aren't, could you just explain what Forum is that you were blown away for? The peer group situation that you got from YPO that you were blown away by?
Yeah. So, the definition is it's a group of roughly 8 people that meet in a structured, confidential, non-judgmental environment to help each other grow personally and professionally. But in order to do that, it's really important that they build trust. Because as you could imagine, not everybody is quick to trust and not everybody is quick to be open and honest. But until you're open and honest, then trust isn't engendered with other people and you're not talking about the real things. Yeah. But once you get to the real matter, then it's very profound and very meaningful. And people quickly realize, their behavior at work or at home is very much their behavior in these peer groups. And if you can be aware and open to how people see you and how people see you behaving, you can really make some big strides in terms of being a better leader, a better person, a being father, a better wife, husband, etc.
Lovely. Okay, so let's go back. You're, I guess, getting mentored, or EO perhaps is getting mentored on how Forum works and why it's beneficial. So then you start to create forums after this training?
Exactly. So I at that point, just as part of my job, I traveled to God knows over 30 countries and started hundreds, 300-400 groups, just as part of my job for no pay, but it was my favorite part of my job very quickly. And in fact, Brad, I started to dislike other parts of my job. This is really what I loved because it was meaningful, it was soulful, and I felt like I was making a difference.
Wonderful. Okay, and I'm going to come back to EO in just a moment. Then you leave EO 1997, I think it is. Yeah. Tell us about what happened next.
So that's when I started Forum Resources Network. And my mission then is still my mission today, just different businesses, making a different approach, but the same mission. And that mission is, I think, every human being deserves to be in one of these forums or peer groups because I think they're just life-changing.
For me personally, I joined EO about 2003, so just over 20 years ago, and left about 2012. And then my wife, to your point, my wife said to me, "I think it's time that you went back. You're a much more full, more wholesome person when you have a forum." So yeah, anecdotally, I agree with you.
I got to tell you, a couple of things. I literally wouldn't have my father in my life if it wasn't for my forum. I wouldn't have started my first business if it wasn't for my forum. I wouldn't have bought out my first business partner if it wasn't for my forum. On and on and on.
And I have absolutely no doubt about that. There might be some listeners who are like, whoa, what is this thing? But it really is that profound a change, especially for entrepreneurs who want to, I guess, metaphorically, run twice as fast as they might be capable of.
Amen.
Okay, so then Forum Resources Network, you set that up. Give us the quick synopsis until today, and then we'll come backwards.
Yeah, so that company still goes on today. We have a handful, call it 10, 12 facilitators that we deploy for various projects, and they're based in many places around the world, mostly in North America, but they're certainly all over. And, again, it was in service of providing every organization with an outsourced peer group solution, A to Z. So if you are IBM and you say, we want to create a peer group program for our employees, then we can do everything from helping you with how to set it up and how to match it, and the trainings and the facilitation of the monthly meetings, and providing the facilitators to do all of that. So that is the purpose of that business. As you mentioned earlier, then I went on to co-found Harvard Business School Alumni Forums, and that business really was for the business school alumni community, and Harvard became our very first and biggest client, and we got to close to 100 peer groups for Harvard Business School alumni, which was just incredible. And now the latest business is International Facilitators Organization, and that really is more of a certification body and an association to provide support groups for the facilitators themselves, so they could sharpen the saw and become the best versions of themselves, so they could do a good job delivering this work.
It knowing you as I do, there is so much more to mow that I'd like to dig into now than just talking about facilitation. So let me ask you, how did your time as a leader at EO change you? You left college, you literally jumped in the hot seat. I don't know, there must be 25 or 30,000 EO members around the world now, all entrepreneurs. And I could have that number slightly wrong, but you were really there at the very beginning. How did that change you from the time you jumped out of college in there and the time you left?
There are a couple of things that I think are really just part of the blood and part of the sweat of that organization, which is when you're an entrepreneur, you're going to work hard, you're going to work fast, and you're going to believe in yourself, and you're going to get it done. And when somebody says, hey, can you do this? You're going to say yes, and you're going to go figure out how to do it. and that's the spirit of entrepreneurship. And really just seeing all these amazing entrepreneurs was so inspiring. And I learned along the way, too, that, to delegate. Some of these entrepreneurs had big companies, and, every year there was a new chairman of the board. And if that person had a $100 million company, they gave me a lot of rope, and I thrived. If they had a $1 million company, they tended to be a little bit more controlling, and I suffocated. So that was another lesson. But I would say my MBA was really standing up and doing the right thing. So there was a moment in time when really I was tested, and at a very young age, and we were starting to have a courtship with YPO, so to speak, where we were invited to move our headquarters from DC to their offices in Dallas, Texas. And it sounded great until I went down there, and their CFO said, oh, by the way, when you guys come down here, we'll get 1,000 members overnight. And I'm like, what do you mean you're going to get 1,000 members overnight? I thought we're just leasing some office space. But that's not the bad part. The bad part is our chairman of the board at the time didn't want me to tell our own board what I discovered. And I had a couple of sleepless nights, but I had to do the right thing. And, in 1995, I'm not even 30 years old yet. And it was a trying and testing time for me, but I'm proud to say I did the right thing.
One of my team members is a YPO member, and he was describing the difference between YPO and EO, which I always find to be a very interesting perspective. And he said the EO members are more entrepreneurial, which is no surprise to you and I. But I think that it's good to, like the hard work that you did there, I think that it's continued to ripple through the years. So I suppose I thank you because otherwise the benefit from that tough decision and call that you had to make, it never would have continued down there. Because he said it's quite clear who is a YPO member and who isn't in his words. And that was only on the weekend at our own retreat.
I will, and just to be clear, I love YPO. And,
oh yeah, so do I.
I've been heavily involved in YPO for a couple of decades now. I just, as executive director of EO, had a responsibility to represent the members and to do the right thing. And if that meant I was going to be unpopular and create a little bit of a tough situation for myself, that was still the right thing to do. But it was just a matter of the decision-making process and how we're carrying it out.
I mean, each organisation has continued to focus on its the needs of its members, and the needs of entrepreneurs are different to the needs of presidents in that case. And I think that frankly the world is better for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk about that transition, because what was happening at that point before you joined EOs? You were thinking about a career in finance and set for a career in finance on Wall Street. So how did that change? Because a very different path, rather than going down Wall Street compared to heading into EO and doing that. And I guess what was it that made you take that path, first of all? And you could just say, look, Vern convinced me. But what was it that made you take that path, firstly? And I guess, as you started to meet more entrepreneurs, how did it reinforce that was the right decision?
Well, I think there's a lot of things contributing to that choice. And, so I'll go back to, as a student, my family had me thinking I should go be an engineer. I'm the furthest thing from an engineer, so I struggled with calculus and chemistry, and as a consequence ended up on academic probation in my freshman year in college. And then, I realized, hey, this isn't for me. And I switched to pre-architecture, and I loved it. And I started getting on the dean's list, and I just thrived. But then I found out architects don't make money in the US until they do a 10-year apprenticeship, so I switched to business. And I specialized in finance because I thought Wall Street sounded good. But, things kind of take their way, and when I met Vern, what I was reminded by is my own family is a family of entrepreneurs. And so I was always, it was always in the back of my mind, this notion of entrepreneurship, which is perhaps why I took his class in the first place. But, my mom and her siblings started the first Egyptian credit card in Egyptian currency, back in the late 80s. And in that regard, I saw entrepreneurship all around me and other businesses along the way. And that is why I signed up for the class. And then Vern just blew my socks off. And Vern did something else. Every other class, he would bring in one of the EO members to speak to us. And so not only was Vern inspiring, but we met all these inspiring entrepreneurs just as we were college kids. And so it opened up the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Tell us about something that you are proud of at your time at EO, perhaps.
I'm certainly proud of the work we did to establish Forum. At EO, members consider it the number one member benefit.
Yes.
At YPO, members consider it the number one member benefit. Both of those organizations enjoy a retention rate of over 95%, which is really high in the world of nonprofit membership organizations. And it's clear it's because of this powerful program that really is super glue for the membership.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And rightly so. It is tens of thousands of people it's impacted. Mo, I've been fortunate enough to be in a room where you have presented a few times over my life. And I remember in 2015, you presented an icebreaker to Gazelles coaches in Dallas when I was in the room. And
yep, I remember that.
Within 5 minutes, you had many people in the room in tears. and I've never seen anything like it. I've spent a lifetime learning from business thought leaders, and I've never seen anyone that has such profound insights into building trust and collaboration as you do.
Thank you.
What are some practical steps? So I go now from all of the soft stuff to give me some practical stuff. What are some practical steps that individuals can take to build authentic connections in their personal and professional lives?
Yeah, wonderful question. The first thing that shouldn't be taken for granted is when we do this work, we make sure there's no conflict of interest in any group. So we're not going to put you in a group with your, business partner. We're not going to put you in a group with your mother-in-law. We're not going to put you in a group with anyone that might limit your ability to be open. So that's the first thing, just as background. The second thing is creating the safe environment, the safe container. And, the first piece of that is confidentiality, which, we spend a lot of time stressing what it means to say this is confidential. It doesn't mean you could tell your spouse. It doesn't mean you could tell anyone without permission from the person who shared whatever it is that you want to share.
Yeah.
So really, that creates a very, very important, lock that gives people a sense of safety, knowing it's not going to go anywhere else. The next concept that's really critical is non-judgment. And so something that's really hard to do for a lot of people is to not give advice, right? In fact, people often ask for advice, but it turns out when you give advice, somebody might receive it with judgment. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but I will just say this. Even Harvard Business Review came out with an article about 10 years ago. Mind you, Brad, we've been talking about this since 1991. But HBR came out with this article about 10 years ago. And they said when advice is given and it's not taken, the relationship suffers. Now, how many of you out there listening know you've been given advice by your parents that you've ignored, or you've given advice to your children that they've ignored, or you've given advice to whomever and pissed them off? And so I think it's one of these things that at a pedestrian level, we do it obliviously, but if you really dig into it, it's at the core of what these groups require in order to have that safe environment and to build trust and to get to know each other through every challenge that they face. Because instead of 7 people saying, Brad, here's what you need to do, you've got 7 people sharing their stories, each of which is a case study that everybody can learn from, not just us telling you, Brad, here's what you should do.
So taking that out of a forum or group context, when what you said there is when someone tells you what to do and you don't listen, it's degrading the relationship somewhat. Words to that effect. Mm. Is the antidote then, moreover, to speak from Gestalt, is the antidote then to more speak from experience in a personal relationship, perhaps? Is that what I can read between the lines there, do you think?
Exactly. And what it does is it reciprocates vulnerability, right? So if you are challenged with something and you share that challenge with me, in effect, you're sharing a vulnerability. When I tell you what to do, I'm kind of saying, hey, I know what's best for you. And do I really know what's best for you after you've explained your situation to me for 5 or even 30 minutes? No, I don't. But by sharing my experience, I'm also sharing a time that I've been there and whatever vulnerabilities I may not be comfortable sharing around that story.
And then from the person who's telling the other person what to do, when the other person doesn't listen, they feel like they're not taking advice. So I suppose it's about also understanding the nature of the interaction and relationship, because sometimes advice is sought and worthy and acted on, but I find it a safe space to go to try as much as possible to speak from experience.
Absolutely. And listen, I don't want to be black and white about it. I will say, because look, if I just said to everybody that I've worked with, my advice is not to give advice, that would be a little hypocritical, right?
Yeah. Love it. So now I'd like to ask you about forking up and forking down. You've said that when you talk with someone, you make a decision that you can fork down or you can fork up. Now, I don't know if an Australian accent does that joke any justice whatsoever, right? But what is forking up and forking down, and why is that decision so important?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't want to take credit for David Bradford's work. He is from the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and he's one of those people that I've learned a ton from. So David Bradford basically says, look, when somebody shares something vulnerable, the next person who speaks can fork it up, meaning take it to the surface, to a place of invulnerability, or they could fork it down and continue the vulnerability or even be more vulnerable. If they fork it up, it leaves the first person feeling abandoned and vulnerable. If they continue the vulnerability and fork it down, then it leaves the other person feeling supported and not alone. But the million-dollar question is, what are the 10 things we do every day to fork it up? So somebody shares something that you're uncomfortable with, and what do people mostly do? They crack a joke. Because it's just an easy exit, right?
Yeah. And they don't. Well, that's forking up. They don't want to go to that uncomfortable place.
Exactly. And there's other ways to fork up. We minimize it. It's no big deal. We normalize it. Oh, everybody's gone through that. You'll be fine. There's a lot of ways. Yeah.
It's a conscious decision, and it immediately makes me think about Viktor Frankl saying that there's a gap, and everything that is human happens in the gap between stimulus and response.
Yes, I love Viktor Frankl's work. Man's Search for Meaning, what a great book.
Indeed.
And it was my favorite for a long time. But it's an old book, so it's not the one that I'll share today when you ask me later about my favorite books.
Just drop it out there, so we're all interested to see. Thank you. So in your book, speaking of books, The Friendship Advantage, you emphasize the importance of relationships in driving success. Can you elaborate on how strong relationships can transform organizational culture and productivity?
Well, so we did some research, and the research was on research that was done by Gallup and other organizations that are well trusted. So really, it's not preloaded in any way. It's research that's out there, and we know that when people have just 4 or 5 friends at work, profits go up by 14%. So there's a real business case for it. It's just a question of whether people are comfortable leaning into it or not, and that's where our facilitators are trained. That is exactly, I think, our job, is to create the environment and the space where people see the value of actually having real relationships and lean into it. And when companies know there's a real business case for it, then they're more likely to say, okay, we need to do something to fan the flame, so to speak, and build the relationships amongst people that are, on our team.
But it's hard in some business environments, right? And Pat Lencioni speaks about it in The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He's got a pyramid I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
At the bottom of that pyramid is trust, and that's what we're talking about here. Vulnerability enables trust. And so it's kind of what we're speaking about in the last couple of questions, but without vulnerability, or vulnerability is the doorway that opens trust. It's also something, that vulnerability, that resonates all through your work and your podcast as I listen to it. But leaders can be reluctant to be vulnerable. And you mentioned the facilitators that you offer help to kind of bridge that gap. How can leaders use vulnerability as a leadership strength?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, imagine a leader that makes mistakes and is unwilling to be vulnerable. So what follows that is they're unwilling to own their mistakes. What kind of culture do you think that person is creating?
Not a very good one. I guess one of secrecy, one where people will do what they're told. The word toxic starts to drift to mind.
And they're not willing to take risks because they can't be seen making mistakes, and innovation dies. So that's the very simple way that a leader can be vulnerable. But beyond that, if a leader wants to be seen as a human being to which people can relate, then there's room for them to be vulnerable just about simple things in life. You know, you hear of somebody losing their mother and not even telling their coworkers. Well, there's no shame in that. It may be painful, it may be emotional, but guess what? Those emotions make you human and make you relatable.
Yeah, yeah. And that relatableness is what builds the trust, and the people will get behind and work for the person that equals trust. I mean, I see the disengagement surveys. I'm going to get it wrong. It's something like 30 to 40% of people are disengaged in their job. I don't know that's 100% to do with vulnerability and trust from the leader, but I'm speaking with Lee Brabham on the podcast, and we're talking. Lee's book is The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. He did 20,000 exit interviews, and it's not money. That's 89% of.
It's not money.
It's not money. 89% of managers say it's money, but then you interview the same employees, and they're saying, no, it's not money. There's only 12% left for money. But it comes back to the importance of having a trusted environment in the workplace. What your work in facilitation and personableness and trust, it impacts a lot of people in a lot of ways. As you see, I guess, the world in its multifaceted challenges, I guess, even if I bring it back to only business, what do you hope for the world at this juncture, given your journey in entrepreneurship, given having worked with so many people in building a more trusted relationship? I guess the easy answer is, well, I hope that people trust each other more, but I know that you're not going to give me that.
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of. So I'll tell you something that we've been working on recently since the war in the Middle East that started on October 7th. We've had many clients reach out and say, we have members who are at odds. They've come down on different sides of this issue, and the conversations are not going well, and we're having people quit, and we're having people get really upset, and it's getting pretty divisive. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing as a result of that is civility work. And how do we help people have civil conversations, get to know each other as human beings, listen to each other's stories, and instead of sharing their opinions, to actually tell their stories to one another, so that they create more of a bridge and more empathy and more understanding. So as we do this kind of work, we actually rely on many of the rules that we've already talked about in Forum. One of the subsets of the not giving advice is speaking from experience and not generalizing. So a mistake that people often make today is they generalize. And when you put a whole class of people into one generalization, that's a pretty grave mistake. Not all Jews behave the same, not all Muslims behave the same, not all of them have the same beliefs. And so then you stop getting curious and wanting to understand and get to know each person as a human being. And we make a mistake in classifying a whole group of people as one way or another. And that's a terrible thing to do.
And that's the definition in one language of a great leader, is they know exactly each person's motivations. They know what makes each person tick, and they know how to communicate or interact with each of the different people who are on their team, I suppose. So that kind of ties it back nicely. I really, to that earlier question, I really think quite a lot about the problems that we've got in the world today, and I feel like the answer or a part of the answer lies in leadership. We need more good leaders in the world. Because every day the world becomes more complex, both in business and in NGOs and government. I just keep coming back to the work that we're doing in EO, in YPO, through some of the businesses that you've spoken about, that you're operating. Like I I do feel it's really important work because we just need more leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we did a program with Google in 2020 and 2021 and in part of 2022 where we created peer groups for underrepresented minorities. And when we started the program, you know, Google wanted this program because they saw that these people needed support, rightfully so. But pretty quickly into it, I reached out to Google and I said, you know, it seems like these groups should include the other people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Not just the underrepresented minorities, but the people with whom they're being challenged. Because they need to connect. They need to understand each other. They need to have an understanding of who the other person is and why they do what they do. And then we could bridge the gap. Unfortunately, they asked these groups, and these groups were so protective because they had become so close. They weren't willing to take on any new members, let alone members of a different persuasion, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. And so that didn't go anywhere. Was there any resolution in that story?
You know, I will tell you this. I mean, I just got from the chairman of the North American program for Google.org. We just got a beautiful testimonial about how these people just continue to have incredible relationships that resulted from these groups. So there was a lot of benefit that happened. At the same time, you know, there's always more, Brad. I always want to do more.
Lovely, lovely. All right, thank you. I'm going to change gears now. I'm currently working on my 4th book, and it's called Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. And so it's about building a better business. So for you, Mo, what does a better business look like?
It's a business that's more caring. It's a business that's more kind. It's a business where there's a culture of transparency and trust. It's a business where there are no silos. It's a business where leaders treat people as people. And it's a business where people have authentic, meaningful relationships. So they enjoy going to work and they have somebody who's got their back because they actually care about one another, because they have relationships and they're not just transactional.
Wow. Thank you.
And of course, a business that's profitable. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
And otherwise it doesn't work. But we're looking at better because profitable is existence. Because without profit, you may not exist.
You don't exist, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. What is a book? Oh, I'm excited after you asked that before. You mentioned the book before. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
You know, so my latest book is called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin. Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin. And it's about how we all have saboteurs that impact how we behave and we're not even aware of it, and how to overcome those saboteurs so we could be the best versions of ourselves.
Okay. So inside us, we have, yes.
How we judge each other, how we judge ourselves. Like, you know, like Brad saying to yourself, hey, I'm not good enough.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, wonderful.
In various ways, we have negative talk from time to time, and these are tools to help you get out of that very quickly and to recognize when you're judging yourself or others.
Thank you. Positive Intelligence. We'll put that in the show notes. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn, Mo Fathelbab. I also have a website, mofatelbab.com. Internationalfacilitatorsorganization.com is another one. So any of those will get you to me.
Today, what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off?
Ooh, great question. You know, I think the importance of taking care of yourself. One of the things that I did years ago is I took a course on positive psychology through the University of Pennsylvania. My teacher was in Tel Aviv. I was at home watching every lecture, but it was life-changing. I learned a lot of very practical tools such as gratitude and meditation, and the importance of exercising regularly for your head more so than your body, and many, many other tools. I think that was quite profound, and I highly, highly recommend any book in the space of positive psychology.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, Mo, this brings us to the end. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I speak with many leaders almost every week, and I try to challenge some of the lessons that I've learned from you. And I think that it's important for you to know that the impact that you've had on people far beyond that what you know. So thank you for sharing your wisdom today. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you.
You too, Brad. Thank you so much. A lovely conversation.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.